Welcome to Dice and Quills, where the art of storytelling meets the roll of the dice. I am Darren Ruckle, professional game master and TTRPG writer, here to share the craft behind world building, adventure design, and running unforgettable games. Whether you're a fellow creator, an aspiring pro, or a lifelong player, you're in the right place. So sharpen your quills, ready your dice, and let's dive into the worlds we imagine. Today we're talking about one-on-one scenes, not one-on-one games. We're talking about moments, focus scenes, inside a larger campaign, where the spotlight narrows to a single player. Maybe they've stepped away from the group. Maybe they're having a flashback. Maybe they're the only one who hears a certain voice in the dark. These moments can be unforgettable, personal, sharp, emotional. They can also wreck your pacing, leave the rest of the table behind, and quietly unravel the trust you've built across the group. That's the line we're walking today. Because one-on-one scenes are not a problem. They're not a mistake. They're not something to rush through out of guilt. But they do require precision. You have to know why you're isolating a character, how to deliver it cleanly, and what the rest of the table is supposed to be doing while it happens. If you've ever found yourself glancing around nervously while running a solo beat, wondering if everyone else is bored out of their minds, or if you've ever heard a player say, "That scene was cool, but I felt like I didn't exist for 30 minutes, this episode is for you, because one-on-one scenes aren't just survivable, they're powerful. They can be the hinge point of an arc, the emotional thread that pulls the party closer, the revelation that reshapes everything the group thought they knew, but only if you run them with care, with clarity, and with trust that the story belongs to everyone, even when the spotlight doesn't. Let's start with that fear, the fear of losing the table. Because if you've ever paused a scene, turned to just one player, and watched the rest of the group slowly slide into silence, you've felt it. You've felt the clock ticking in your head. You've felt the pressure to move faster. You've watched someone start scrolling on their phone, or quietly leave for a snack, or just mentally disappear. And you think, this was a mistake. I shouldn't be doing this. I need to wrap this up. But here's the truth. You didn't lose the table because you focused on one player. You lost them because you didn't tell them what their role was in that moment. Because that's the key to a good one-on-one scene. It's not about making it fast. It's about making it shared, even if only one person is speaking. Here's what I mean. Every player at your table is watching for cues. Is this for me or not for me? When the rogue sneaks off to make a deal with a crime boss and you start that solo scene without context, what do the other players assume? This isn't for me. So they disengage, they wait, they scroll. And now you're narrating into a vacuum, trying to keep the tension alive while the room goes flat. But what if, before the scene started, you said this? Okay, just to set this up, we're going to shift focus to Kale for a minute while he talks to the fence. Everyone else, I want you listening, not as your characters, but as audience. You're going to learn something Kale knows, and your characters don't. This is for you, even if it's not about you. That's all it takes. You've reframed the scene. You've given the players a role. You've made them part of the experience instead of passive spectators. Because players disengage when they feel invisible. But if you turn them into an audience, or witnesses, or future consequences, they lean in. They're not just watching, they're tracking. And when the scene ends and Kale rejoins the group, those players bring the tension with them. They roleplay curiosity, suspicion, gaps in knowledge, because they were there, even when they weren't. That's how you keep the table engaged during one-on-one scenes. You don't rush, you frame. So let's step back and ask a bigger question. When should you even run a one-on-one scene? Because not every character split, not every flashback, not every side moment needs to happen at the table. Some are better as summaries, some are better off-screen, some are better as, we'll handle that between sessions. So how do you know which ones deserve the spotlight? The test is simple. Does this moment reveal something the rest of the group needs to understand, even if their characters don't? Not, would this be cool? Not, does this make sense narratively? Not even, would this be good for the character? Ask, does this scene deepen the story the group is telling? Or just the player's personal lore? If it's just personal lore, great. Do it in downtime. Handle it in a message. Make it a between-session flashback. That's not a punishment. That's protecting your table's attention span. But if the scene reshapes how that player behaves, if it answers a mystery the table is actively chasing, if it sets up something that's about to explode in public, then yes, bring it in. Here's the nuance, though, and this is where game masters sometimes misstep. It's not just about plot, it's about emotional alignment. Say you've got a player whose character has been standoffish, quiet, hard to read. The table doesn't know what they're about yet, and frankly, neither do you. You pull them aside for a private scene, a confessional, a dream, a moment with someone from their past. If it works, the player comes back to the table with something changed. They're more invested. They lean in more. And the table feels the shift, even if they don't know the cause. That's worth it. But if it's just a lore dump, if it's just a solo power trip, if it's a moment that makes that player feel important but doesn't ripple into the group, it's not a shared scene. It's just a spotlight hog dressed up as narrative. And players know the difference. They can feel when a scene is about enriching the story and when it's about showing off. So before you run a one-on-one, ask yourself, what changes if this scene happens? If the answer is not much, save it for later. If the answer is everything, run it now. But run it with precision. Now that we know why you're running the scene, let's talk about how you run it, and more importantly, how to keep it lean. Because the danger in a one-on-one scene isn't just that it alienates the table, it's that it drags. When you're in a group scene, pacing is self-correcting. The table keeps moving, people riff, momentum builds. You're not carrying the weight alone. But when it's just you and one player, everything slows down. You feel every pause, every over-explained detail, every moment you're thinking aloud instead of narrating with intent. So here's the fix. You prep your one-on-one scenes like pressure cookers. You want tight framing, clear stakes, no wandering. Start the scene as late as possible. Don't open with, you make your way to the alley. It's quiet. You stand there. What do? Open with, he's already there, leaning against the wall, smoking, waiting. Drop them into the moment, cut the lead in, lose the filler. Then push tension early, not necessarily danger, tension. Is this person lying? Is this a betrayal? Is this a test? Something needs to be off, or urgent, or tempting. If the player can sit in the scene without having to make any choices, your pacing is already slipping. Tight one-on-one scenes ask for decisions, not dialogue. And when you get those decisions, move. Don't linger. Don't over-reward. Don't over-conclude. Let the moment land, then cut away. This is where a lot of game masters stumble. They get the scene working, and then they ride it out too long because it's good. The player is engaged. They're in it. But here's the secret. Ending a one-on-one scene one beat early is better than ending it one beat late. Why? Because the rest of the table is waiting. And the longer you ride the momentum past its peak, the more the table senses that this isn't a story beat anymore. It's indulgence. You want to cut on a high. You want the rest of the table still leaning in, not waiting for their turn. That's how you make one-on-one scenes feel sharp instead of saggy. They don't have to be fast, but they have to be focused. Let's shift focus now to the rest of the table, because this is where most game masters drop the ball. They think, okay, I've framed the scene well. I've kept it tight. That should be enough. But here's the secret. If the other players don't have a job in that scene, they'll check out, even if the pacing is perfect. Not because they're bored, because they've been trained to disengage the moment the spotlight isn't on them. So your job isn't just to keep the solo scene moving. Your job is to make sure the rest of the table knows why they're still here. Let's look at some of the ways to do that, and when to use them. Option 1, the audience seat. This is what we talked about earlier, turning the table into witnesses. You frame the scene and say, You're not here as characters, you're here as players. You're learning something. Feel it. This works well when the player is discovering something hidden. A secret, a motive, a backstory moment. The other players aren't acting, but they're absorbing. And when they come back into character, they're primed for dramatic irony. Option 2, the narrators. This one's a little trickier, but powerful. Let's say the solo scene is a flashback, or a dream, or a vision, something internal, something abstract. Instead of running it like a standard GM and player scene, you recruit the table. You say, "This is happening in Val's memory. I'll guide the moment, but I want you all to voice the NPCs." You hand out parts, or even just vibes. You're the voice of her mother. You're the echo of the soldier she betrayed. You're the storm that never came. Suddenly the solo scene becomes a group performance, and the table's not just engaged, they're invested. Option 3, the consequence council. Sometimes you run a one-on-one scene because the player made a choice, and you want to show the fallout. But instead of just narrating the outcome, you frame it like this. You don't know it yet, but while you were gone, the table made a decision. They interpreted your actions, and now you're walking into that response. Now the table becomes the judges, not as adversaries, but as interpreters of impact. They're deciding what changes and how. You've made the one-on-one scene matter to them, and now they care, because that's the key. When players feel like their input, even their attention, shapes the story, they stay engaged, even when they're not speaking. So the solo scene lands. The player makes a choice. A truth is revealed. A connection deepens. Maybe it's quiet. Maybe it's explosive. Now comes the moment most game masters treat like an afterthought. Re-entry. How do you return from a one-on-one scene without snapping the tone, draining the momentum, or making the spotlighted player feel like they just took a solo journey no one else cares about? The answer is simple, but it has to be intentional. You bridge. You narrate not just the end of the solo scene, but the echo it leaves in the next one. Don't just say, "Okay, and now we cut back to the rest of the group." Say, as Kale walks away from the alley, the smell of blood still fresh in his nose, we cut back to the campfire. You're all there, waiting, maybe wondering. You connect the tones, you pass the emotional baton. You don't just return to the group, you fold back into them. And then, and this part is key, you watch the player. Sometimes they want to re-engage right away. They've got new energy. They want to lie, or confess, or reveal what just happened. Sometimes they want to hold it close, let it simmer. Either one is fine, but you need to signal to the group what kind of moment this is. You say, "Kale's back," but he doesn't speak. Or Kale returns, and you all can see something's shifted. Now the table knows how to respond. Now they have emotional cues. Now they're not guessing. And here's the beautiful part. The best one-on-one scenes don't end when the player leaves the spotlight. They end when the group feels the impact. That's what gives the scene weight. Not just what happened, but what it changes. That could be trust. That could be suspicion. That could be a new goal or a new scar or a thread they now have to follow. But whatever it is, it's shared now. And if you do that well, the solo scene doesn't isolate the player. It connects them more deeply than they were before. Let's talk about the hard part. What happens when a player keeps asking for one-on-one scenes over and over, and it starts to unbalance the game? Because on paper it might look fine. They're into their character. They've got ideas. They're chasing plot. But over time, you start noticing a shift. Other players get less time. Group scenes bend around one person's schedule, or backstory, or drama. You find yourself spending more energy prepping solo beats than the group ones, not because they're better, but because that one player always wants them. And slowly, your campaign stops being shared. Now first, this isn't always malicious. Some players crave spotlight because they're excited. Some because they're shy and only open up one-on-one. Some because that's how they express investment. But regardless of the motive, the impact is the same. The table starts to drift. So what do? You bring it back to the group, not in a confrontation, not by calling anyone out, but by reframing the structure of your story around shared impact. You say things like, "I love this thread you're chasing. Let's find a way to bring it into a group scene." Or, "That conversation is important, but I want the payoff to be visible. Let's save it for next session when it can land publicly." You don't punish the solo energy. You redirect it. And if the player pushes, wants more side scenes, more private flashbacks, more of the story shaped around them, that's when you have the table conversation. Not to say no to solo scenes, but to reinforce that your campaign is about shared narrative. You explain clearly that personal arcs are part of the game, but only when they serve the group. And if that player can't accept that, then it's not about solo scenes anymore. It's about spotlight hoarding. It's about control. And you need to treat it like any other disruptive behavior, with clarity, boundaries, and consequences. Because your game isn't a vehicle for one player's ego, it's a story everyone's writing together. So far, we've talked about how to manage one-on-one scenes when players initiate them. But what about when you initiate it? What about the moments where you decide to narrow the spotlight, not because someone asked, but because the story needs it? That's where one-on-one scenes go from reactive to powerful. Because sometimes, as a GM, you see the thread before the player does. You know a reckoning is coming, a consequence, a moment of clarity. And you know it won't land in a group scene, not yet. So you choose to carve out a moment, quiet, focused, surgical, and if you do it right, that scene becomes the one the player never forgets. Let's say you've got a character who made a deal they don't fully understand. Maybe a patron, maybe a divine power, maybe a criminal contact from back in the day. They've forgotten about it, or pushed it aside, and then you pull them aside and say, "During your watch that night, something speaks to you, not with words, with weight." And suddenly, the deal doesn't feel theoretical anymore. Now you're not giving them a solo scene for fun. You're giving them consequence. Or maybe you're giving them clarity. Maybe a player is lost in the plot, doesn't know how to move forward. You pull them into a one-on-one vision, a memory, a fragment, something they don't have to explain, just feel. That kind of scene doesn't have to be long, doesn't even need resolution, but it reframes the game. It reminds them what's at stake, who they are, why they matter. And sometimes, it's not about them at all. It's about foreshadowing. You give one player a glimpse, a riddle, a secret the others don't know they're carrying. Now they're not just participating, they're haunted, they're watchful, and the tension spreads, not because the group saw it, but because they feel it in the player. That's the gift of the GM-initiated one-on-one scene. It's not extra, it's not indulgent, it's surgical. And when done well, it doesn't take time from the group, it sharpens it. Let's talk about execution. The actual moment at the table when the spotlight narrows and you step into a one-on-one scene. Because all the theory in the world won't help you if the energy's off in the room, if the pacing wobbles, if you start strong but something slips, and suddenly the table is confused, the player's unsure, and you're scrambling to fix it mid-scene. So let's break down what actually happens, physically, vocally, structurally, when you do this well. First, you shift your voice. That doesn't mean you whisper, it means you modulate, pull back, slow your delivery slightly, narrow your tone. You're not speaking to 5 people now, you're speaking to 1, but the room is still listening, and you want them to feel that shift. Second, change your posture. If you're running the game in person, this might mean leaning forward, making eye contact, tilting slightly toward the player in question, without turning your back on the group. You are including them, without excluding everyone else. Online, same idea. Change your focus, use their name, narrow your framing, but never mute the others. Keep the energy communal. Third, and this is important, signal duration. You don't have to give a countdown, but players get anxious when they don't know how long they're expected to wait. So you set expectations in your tone, in your pacing. You let them feel that this scene has shape, that it's not going to spiral. It might sound like, all right, this is just a quick beat while Val's off on her own. Should only take a couple minutes. Or, this is going to be a short vision. Hang tight and we'll pick back up right after. Even if it ends up going long, they know you're aware. You've accounted for their time. That's the difference between control and drift. But sometimes, even when you do all that, the scene doesn't land. The player freezes. The emotion slips. The table checks out. The tension fizzles. What then? You close early. You don't drag. You don't force a conclusion. You say, all right, let's pause that beat here. We can pick it back up later if needed. Then you re-engage the group. Smoothly, without shame, without awkwardness, because not every one-on-one scene has to work, but everyone needs to respect the table. So let's bring this one home. One-on-one scenes aren't just a tool for spotlight. They're a way to listen. To a character, to a player, to the heartbeat of your story beneath all the dice rolls and tactical choices and group dynamics. Because when you strip the scene down to one player and one moment, something changes. You get honesty. Not always the kind spoken aloud. Sometimes it's in a hesitation, a question, a glance that says more than dialogue ever could. But you see who they are. You see what matters. You see what's worth following. And when the group watches that moment, when they feel it in the silence, or the tension, or the shift that follows, they buy in harder. Because that wasn't just a character getting screen time. That was the story opening its eyes. The real magic of one-on-one scenes isn't that they're private. It's that they're revealing. They show us the things that group scenes often can't. The inner mechanics, the pressure points, the weight behind a player's next choice. And if you as a GM can learn when to create them, how to frame them, run them, and reintegrate them, your campaign gets sharper, deeper, more alive. Not because you spent more time on one player, but because you gave the story a moment to breathe. Next time on Dice and Quills, we're talking about how to fix a campaign that's drifting, when the energy dips, when people stop caring, when the story loses momentum and you don't know how to bring it back. We'll dig into the tools that revive a campaign before it flatlines. Until next time, sharpen your quills, ready your dice. And remember, a good solo scene doesn't isolate the story, it focuses it.